Is he the biggest problem in college football? Is Brock Bowers the best player in college football? Look, he's got the argument for it. All sorts of people are making all sorts of comments about Brock Bowers and how good he is. And you guys know how good he is. You've been watching it now this is year 3 of watching a special football player. But SEC Network analysts and then Aaron Murray, they've all made some comments about Brock Bowers recently. I want to read or just share a couple of them with you. Dari Naka, this dude is a problem. He's the only person that I know that makes 19 look good. That was an SEC Network analyst. And then they were asking him, Takeo Spikes and Chris Doering about Brock Bowers after showing, how he drags people 10 yards, going backwards, how he, breaks almost every single initial tackle. And you've seen it on the highlights. He said, I don't know. I'd try to hit him early. I didn't say that I have a plan. I said that you have to have a plan. I think that's what Takeo Spikes said on the SEC Network. He doesn't have a plan for Brock Bowers. Doesn't know how you stop Brock Bowers. Right? This is a former SEC linebacker who was making these comments about Brock Bowers. Aaron Murray on a broadcast recently, I want to say it was in that first game against UT Martin. Yeah, I believe he called that first game against UT Martin in week 1. He said that Brock Bowers I can't remember what the adjective was, but called him like the biggest chess piece in college football, even more so than those Ohio State wide receivers. So Bowers is being looked at as possibly the premier offensive weapon in college football. And look, there are some great college football players out there, right? And some great offensive players. Travis Hunter is a name that comes to mind as one of the more dynamic players, not just offensive players, but players in general. And of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. is up there, right? Marvin Harrison Jr. projected to be a top 5 pick as a wide receiver. Brock Bowers likely, look, with tight end, it's kind of a mixed bag. We know Kyle Pitts went in the top 5 a couple years back. He went number 4 to the Atlanta Falcons, right? We've seen some other tight ends. Look, I think Eric Ebron in the last 10 years is a guy that went top 10. We've seen some other first-round guys. Dalton Kincaid in this past draft was a late first-round guy. So for Brock Bowers, it's not as clear, where he's going to go in the NFL draft. But he's a first-round pick. I expect him to not fall out of the top 10 or 15. I'd be surprised if he fell out of the top 10 or 15 picks. Brock Bowers will enter this draft as, one of the 5 best players in the draft. Prospects, that's up to these teams on how they feel about him as a prospect. But I don't even have Brock Bowers' numbers pulled up. You know what I have is the all-time Georgia receiving numbers. Because guess what? The other day, he passed 2,000 yards. He's now 9th in Georgia football history in receiving yards with, it looks like, I'm looking at Sports Reference. It's got him at 2,080 receiving yards. I want to put this out there. Let's look at the touchdowns. He's got 22. He could end up with the most touchdowns on this list. You tell me Brock Bowers can't get 8 more touchdowns this year? How many games are left? 8 in the regular season, possibly 2 or 3 more after that. You could be playing 10, 11 more games. Brock Bowers could certainly get 8 touchdowns. I'm looking at this list. Terrence Edwards, 3,000. Look, is Bowers going to get to Terrence Edwards 3,000 yards? No. I'd be pretty surprised if he gets another 1,000 yards on the season. But he could get 8 more touchdowns and tie Terrence Edwards. And those are just receiving touchdowns. He's got 5 rushing touchdowns on his career as well. So he's got 27 total touchdowns now in 2 seasons and a month of football. But you look at the list: Terrence Edwards, Fred Gibson, A.J. Green, Tavares King, Bryce Hunter, Malcolm Mitchell, Muhammad Massaquoi, Lindsey Scott. Those are the 8 names ahead of Brock Bowers. Here, realistically, who's Bowers going to pass? Well, I think he's going to pass Lindsey Scott next game. He's only 18 yards behind Lindsey Scott, so I think he'll climb up to number 8 on the list next week. Granted that he gets those 18 yards. But let's say he gets, in the next 8 games, let's say he gets 500 receiving yards. Let's do a little bit more of a safe number. Let's say Brock Bowers gets 500 receiving yards over the next 8 games. This is just regular season. That would put him at 2,580. That would shoot him up to number 5 on the all-time Georgia receiving yard list. So that top 5 pass catchers ever in Georgia history, statistically, is what Brock Bowers is probably on pace for. Look, and in that top, I'm looking at the top 20. He is number 3 in touchdowns. In that top 20, he is number 3 in touchdowns. I expect him to end up as number 1 or 2 in that regard. And that's not even counting the fact that he's got 5 rushing touchdowns. Those are just receiving touchdowns. So Bowers is going to end up as one of the statistical monsters in Georgia football history. Obviously, a Georgia football legend, part of these 2 national championship runs, and just one of the most exciting Georgia players that has played in the red and black. He's just point blank, and one of the best. You think about the premier players that Georgia's had over the last 10 or 15 years, and not just talent and everything, but production as well, where this guy's a star. Who have been the true stars of Georgia recently? Todd Gurley, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel. DeAndre Swift was a star in my eyes. Jalen Carter, Nakobe Dean, Roquan Smith, guys like that, productive and also, had that star power. Jordan Davis didn't have the production, but he definitely had the star power in the media's eyes. Bowers is up there with all of them, arguably at the top of that list in terms of, what they've accomplished at Georgia. Nick Chubb and Sony Michel obviously did a lot, but Bowers being a part of the 2 national championships. And look, I think he's only going to play 3 years at Georgia, so he won't have that 4th year to tack on the stats and the history as a couple of those other guys did. But some of those other guys were also just 3-year players. Bowers statistically is. Kirby's always texting me while I'm trying to do these videos. I want to see what his numbers are for this season, and you're probably hearing me type, and I apologize. Because I did not have his numbers for the season pulled up. So through 4 games, he's got 256 yards receiving. We could do some real math here now. So let's say he just averages that pace. So he's averaging 65 a game times 8 throughout the regular season. I was about right. My rough math was about right. If he continues the pace he's on, he'll end up with about 2,500 receiving yards in his career by the end of the regular season. That put him in the top 5. And then, look, Georgia is going to play at least 14 games this year. I'd be surprised if they don't play 14. 15, obviously, you're making it to the national championship if you play 15 games. Bowers has more chances to do that. I think he's going to have more than just 8 more games, right? 4 games done, 8 more to go in the regular season. I expect the SEC championship for Georgia, it's an expectation. So a 9th game and then a 10th game would be a bowl game / bowl playoff game, right? Georgia wins a playoff game, they obviously go to the national championship. So he's going to have more and more chances to climb up the leaderboard. Now, if he really goes off, it's in the realm of possibility that he gets to 3,000. 1,000 yards. Let's say Georgia plays in all those games. They end up playing in the national championship as well, and Georgia played 15 games this year, which means he would have 11 more games to play this season. I mean, he could, and if he just has consistent production, Brock Bowers could end up being the all-time leading receiver for Georgia. Hey, look, real quick, newsletter is down below. I waited very long in this video. Ryan Curley is my name if you don't know me. I waited towards the end of this thing to talk about that, but make sure you're clicking that, and if you've hung around for this long, thanks for watching as we talk about Bowers' statistical prowess in Athens. I mean, it's not surprising that he hit 2,000 yards at this point in his career. It's just surprising when you really look at it, and then you watch him play, and you think about just sometimes. Do you guys get used to seeing what he does? You start to get used to it after a while, right? Someone texted me that they think that he's quietly a star. And yeah, well, Brock Bowers is a quiet guy, and that is part of it. And he is not this, big media darling that's always saying stuff. He's not this guy that's rah-rah on social media, whatever it is. He's not Nolan Smith. There's your example. But Bowers, he makes noise on the field. You see the two touchdowns he had. One of them was obviously more impressive than the other, where he shook the 2 guys off. He does that on the regular. There are not that many football players in football, not just the NFL, not just college, in football, where when they touch the ball, it feels like they might score. Right? That's just what it is with Bowers. It's the same way you feel about a lot of guys. It's the same way you feel about a Bijan Robinson or a Christian McCaffrey or whoever in the league or whoever in college football you feel that way about. Bowers is there. And he's got a chance to break records for the Georgia Bulldogs, especially touchdown records. Thanks for watching. Link is down below for the newsletter.